And so every day you have to shoot at a different target.
Could I follow up on that just for a little bit? So yeah, that's basically that's a similar story I tell students. Say I teach technical and fundamental analysis and portfolio theory together, and tell them basically you need all three of them. You need fundamental analysis to form your own opinion about the firm, and then you need technical analysis perhaps to try to gauge the sentiment of the market. Because if you find the firm is good, doesn't mean you have to buy it if everybody else overpricing it. So then I tell them your view of the firm and the market's view of the firm sort of serve as counter checks for each other. You know, you look at the market's view to try to validate yours, and vice versa. You look at yours to validate the market, and you see the discrepancy. The problem that I have with this conceptual, my students have, is how do you know which view is closer to the true value of the firm, and how do you know which one of you or the market is in greater error? So you see discrepancy.
This is where you need a thesis or a hypothesis. I use this term, sort of both terms, thesis or hypothesis, which you have to kind of formulate. That's why it's good to write a memo. Or that's why, for instance, I used to benefit from releasing analyses, that forced me to put my argument in writing. And that's why my real-time experiment actually helped me to make money, because it made my thesis more concrete. It was out there, and a week after I read what I wrote the week before, and I could see whether I was on the right track or not. You see, so this is the reality check. So you have to test your thesis against reality, and the market is wonderful as a laboratory because it actually has a rather unambiguous character. Stock is either going up or down, and has a certain price, which is not something that you can have in politics or in dealing with history. History is more ambiguous, what the concept, how it's really playing out. So markets are an excellent laboratory for testing. And I think you said the right thing, that my approach is to have a view of reality and then expose it to reality. And then I can find out whether my view is correct or not. And if your view is, as a student, is constantly incorrect, then better choose another profession.
Yeah, coming back, Stuart and I have been involved in this project over the past several months where we're exploring contrasting concepts of science. And I'm seeing this similarity here because Stuart talks a lot about cybernetics. And I guess what I'm hearing in both of your approaches is that pointing out that the old concept of science, economic theory as it's standardly accepted, is too simplistic, but in a way that cannot be replaced with a concept that would be regarded as scientific by their proponents because, well, cybernetics contradicts the old concept of science, and your approach contradicts the old. So and it strikes me that, first of all, this may be a reason why standard economists may not accept, because it's not simply that you're proposing a new theory. Beyond the idea of reflexivity, there is not a theory at all from which you could then make predictions. What you do is you formulate a hypothesis. And so the concept of knowledge is really one of continual learning. And the old Aristotelian idea was that we're going to systematize our knowledge so that we could teach it. And what you're teaching were those general definitions, from which you could derive conclusions, and that would give you certainty. And this is a very different concept of knowledge. It's not certain true belief. Rather, it's an evolving, ever-evolving learning. And so what you come out with is not the body of theory, but the person who has been informed by these experiences, who is better able to function within the situation.
That's right. That is exactly right.
And that's what that triangle's all about.
Come on, come to me.
Mark and I have been going back and forth on this triangle for some time.
Well, it's not this triangle. It's
Well,
the 30 of them that you put together.
I like to make diagrams. But just to say a word about this triangle, the notion of correspondence theory of truth, where you try to formulate a theory which is a description of the world, is the left side, where you have language and world. Okay, and then it's a match. You know, it's like the photograph metaphor. How good a photograph is the theory of the phenomenon. But then constructivism, cognitive science, whatever you want to call it, focus on the observer and how the observer constructs descriptions. And that's sort of the bottom part there, philosophical cybernetics. And then what I think we're talking about now, what Mark was talking about, is how the observer interacts with the world. So it's a more pragmatic notion. Truth is what is useful. Truth is what works. And language and description are kind of a means to an end. They may be a means of formulating a consensus or of testing your perceptions relative to other people's perceptions. And the purpose of the triangle is just to say if you put all that together, then you have a larger view of the scientific process than simply limiting it to language in the world, to description and phenomena.
Yeah, but you see, this is where I see a problem on the third one. You see, because you said that the truth is what works, and that isn't so.
Well, that's the right-hand side.
Yeah.
If you put it all together, then I think you get closer to your view. In other words, if you take any one of those legs in isolation, then you get what you described as, in a sense what I'm saying is that there are three extremes rather than two extremes. But if you combine them, you have a more versatile view of science.
Isn't that what Mark was just saying, that it's these three things together in one person?
I think is somewhat different. I mean, you know, we often hear that a new science can, the old science is reducible to the new science. It's not true. You know, Newton's theory contradicts Bohr's theory. You know, it's not that the two contradicts Einstein's theory as well. It's not that the two can be reduced to each other. They're fundamentally opposed. What I'm saying is that the idea of cybernetics, as I understand it, is fundamentally opposed to the idea of, say, positivist philosophy of science. So what happens is that when I hear you talk about cybernetics, I hear talk about the simplicity of the old model. When I hear you talk about reflexivity, I hear you talk about the simplicity of the old model. The axioms are false, it's too simplistic a view, it doesn't take into account feedback relationships, so on and so forth. And that is very good to know. It gives you courage to attack positions that are put forth by the old theory that you happen to disagree with. But it doesn't yield a theory in that sense. It yields a guess, a hypothesis that you actively test. And the concept of knowledge, I think, that is involved is the concept of the individual becoming a wiser person as he puts forth his hypotheses, tests them, sometimes have them slammed in his face, and so on and so forth.
You see, I'd like to reconcile the two positions. I think it can be, because the old theory becomes a special case within a new theory. So let's say Newton physics is a special case in Einstein's theory. I don't know the details, but that's the way it is. And I think that classical economics is a special case within this theory of reflexivity.